You're being manipulated. Right now, today, the media is showing you exactly what they want you to see while hiding what they don't want you to know. And the difference between what they show and what they hide reveals everything about their agenda. 2 people shot by ICE agents in 2026 during federal enforcement operations. The media coverage has been wall-to-wall. Renee Good and Alex Preddy have been turned into martyrs. ICE is being painted as out-of-control thugs. Every network, every newspaper, every social media platform is pushing the same narrative. Immigration enforcement is violent and dangerous. Meanwhile, 7 mass shootings perpetuated by transgender individuals since 2018, with 3 happening just in 2026 alone. Dozens of people are dead, children murdered in schools and churches, families destroyed, and the media, crickets, silence. When they do cover it, they go out of their way to avoid mentioning that the shooter was transgender. Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. Because acknowledging a pattern of violence among transgender individuals would raise questions about the mental health crisis that gender ideology creates. Because it would force people to wonder if maybe, just maybe, telling confused kids that they can change their sex through hormones and surgeries is creating a generation of deeply damaged people who eventually lash out violently when reality hits. The media keeps you focused on 2 people shot by ICE while hiding dozens shot by transgender killers. They keep you mad at the wrong thing, and they're doing it deliberately. This episode is about the violence they won't cover, the pattern they're hiding, and why transgender ideology that Democrats are pushing is creating cold-blooded killers.
The independent media company The Truth in the Darkness Network presents the Courage in the Darkness show with your host Philip Roberts, shutting down the narrative and bringing you the truth that the indoctrinated leftist sheep can't handle.
Let me lay out the facts so you understand exactly what we're dealing with and what the media is deliberately concealing. Since 2018, there have been 7 documented mass shooting incidents involving transgender individuals. Let me walk you through them chronologically so you see the pattern. 2018, Aberdeen, Maryland. Sonochia Mosley, a transgender man, killed 3 co-workers at a Rite Aid distribution center before dying by suicide. 3 people dead. The media covered it briefly and moved on without emphasizing the shooter's identity. 2019, Highlands Ranch, Colorado. Alec McKinney, a transgender student along with Devin Erickson, carried out a shooting at STEM school, Highlands Ranch. 1 student dead, 8 injured. McKinney told investigators that bullying over gender identity was a factor. The media covered this as a school shooting, but downplayed the transgender element. 2022, Colorado Springs, Colorado. Anderson Lee Aldrich, who authorities said identified as non-binary, opened fire inside an LGBTQ plus nightclub. 5 people dead. The media struggled with this one because the shooter targeted the very community they claimed to be a part of. So they mostly focused on hate and gun control without digging into the shooter's mental state. 2023, Nashville, Tennessee. This one was close to home. Audrey Hale, identified by police as a transgender man, killed 6 people at Covenant School, including 3 children. 6 people dead, 3 of them kids. This one got major coverage because it was children. But the media fought to suppress the shooter's manifesto and tried desperately to avoid discussing the transgender identity. 2025, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Robin Westman, identified by authorities as transgender, killed 2 children during a church service at Annunciation Catholic Church before dying by suicide. 2 children dead in a church. The media barely covered this at all. 2026, Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia. Jesse Van Rootseller, identified by police as trans, allegedly killed 8 people, 5 students and 1 teacher, before dying from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. 8 people dead. This just happened. The media coverage has been minimal and carefully avoids discussing the shooter's identity. 2026, Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Robert Dorgan, identified as transgender and also known as Roberta Esposito, killed 3 people, including family members, before taking his own life. 3 people dead. Again, minimal coverage, and the transgender element is buried. Now, let me add this up for you. 7 incidents. At least 27 people dead, not counting the shooters themselves. Multiple children among the victims. And this is just what's been documented and confirmed. There may be more cases where the shooter's transgender identity wasn't reported or confirmed. Compare that to ICE enforcement. 2 people shot in 2026 during federal operations. Both were actively interfering with law enforcement. Both were warned. Both made choices that resulted in them being shot. 2 versus 27. 2 people who put themselves in dangerous situations versus 27 innocent victims who were murdered. 2 incidents that got wall-to-wall coverage versus 7 incidents that the media either buried or covered without mentioning the key common factor. This is deliberate. This is coordinated. This is the media deciding what you're allowed to know and what they're going to hide from you. Now, advocacy groups like GLAAD will tell you there's no evidence of escalating violence committed by LGBTQ people. They'll cite statistics showing that transgender perpetrators represent less than 0.1% of all mass shootings. That's a bullshit argument, and here's why. Transgender individuals represent about 0.6% of the population according to most estimates. If they're committing mass shootings even at 0.1% of the total, they're actually slightly underrepresented statistically. But that's not the point. The point is the pattern. The point is that when these incidents happen, there are common factors that nobody wants to examine. The point is that we're seeing an increase. 3 incidents just in the last 2 years compared to 4 in the previous 5 years. Something is happening. Something is driving this. And the media, the advocacy groups, the Democrats, they're all working together to make sure you never ask the questions that might reveal what that something is. Because if people start asking questions about the connection between gender dysphoria, hormone treatment, surgical transition, and eventual violent outbursts, the entire transgender ideology collapses. If people start wondering whether telling confused kids that they can solve their problems by changing their sex is creating a mental health crisis that leads to violence, the Democrats' agenda falls apart. If the people start demanding that we treat gender dysphoria as a mental illness the way it used to be, it is instead of affirming and celebrating it, billions of dollars in pharmaceutical profits and political power disappear. So they hide it. They minimize it. They attack anyone who points it out as transphobic. They keep you focused on 2 people shot by ICE, while dozens are being murdered by transgender killers. This is information warfare. This is narrative control. This is the media deciding that their political agenda is more important than your safety or your right to know the truth, and it needs to be exposed. Now let's talk about what these cases have in common and why nobody in mainstream media or politics will discuss it honestly. Dr. Carol Lieberman, a forensic psychiatrist, laid out the psychological pattern that precedes mass violence. She identified several consistent factors: dysfunctional childhood with abuse or neglect, isolation or bullying, immersion in violent media, substance abuse, and a belief that nobody likes them, leading to resentment and hatred. Then there's typically a triggering event, a rejection, a breakup, a death, job loss, something that destabilizes them and makes them believe the time is now to punish others. Now let me ask you, does this sound like it might describe people dealing with severe gender dysphoria? People who are so uncomfortable in their own bodies that they think they need to medically transition? People who face bullying and isolation because of their gender confusion? People who develop deep resentment toward a society they believe doesn't accept them? Of course it does. Gender dysphoria is a mental health condition characterized by severe distress about one's biological sex. People experiencing it are, by definition, in psychological crisis. Many have co-occurring mental health issues: depression, anxiety, personal disorders, trauma. These are people who need serious mental intervention. They need therapy to address the underlying psychological issues causing their distress. They need support systems. They need to be helped to accept their biological reality and find peace with who they actually are. But that's not what they're getting. Instead, the transgender ideology tells them that the solution is medical transition, hormones, surgery, change your body to match how you feel inside. You're not mentally ill. Society is just transphobic. Your distress isn't a symptom of underlying psychological problems. It's evidence that you're actually the opposite sex. So kids as young as teenagers are being put on puberty blockers. They're being given cross-sex hormones that permanently alter their bodies. They're having surgeries that remove healthy organs and create artificial approximations of opposite sex anatomy. And then what happens? Reality sets in. The hormones and surgery don't actually solve their psychological problems. They don't suddenly feel at peace. the underlying mental health issues are still there because changing your body doesn't change your brain chemistry or resolve childhood trauma or fix personality disorders. Worse, they realize that they've been lied to. They realize they can't actually become the opposite sex no matter how many hormones they take or surgeries they have. They realize they've permanently damaged their bodies based on the promises of ideologues who told them transition would fix everything. This is when depression hits harder. This is when the resentment turns to rage. This is when they start looking for someone to blame for what's been done to them. And sometimes that rage leads to violence. Look at the cases. Alec McKinney cited bullying over gender identity as a motivation. That's someone who transitioned, faced social consequences, and lashed out violently. Audrey Hale targeted a Christian school. Why? Because Christians are the ones who say that gender ideology is wrong, that biological sex is immutable, that transition is not the answer. Hale's manifesto, which authorities worked very, very hard to suppress, apparently reflected rage at the religious community that rejected the transgender identity. Robin Westman targeted a church, killed children during a church service. Again, lashing out at the religious community that represents opposition to transgender ideology. Anderson Lee Eldridge targeted an LGBTQ plus nightclub despite identifying as non-binary. Why would someone who identifies as part of that community attack it? Because maybe they're filled with rage at the ideology that led them to this place, at the community that encouraged their transition, at the life they're now stuck with. This is the pattern nobody will discuss. Transgender individuals who transition, who find that it doesn't solve their problems, who are left with permanent physical changes and ongoing mental health crises, who develop rage at a society they blame for their situation, and who eventually lash out violently. But you can't say this publicly. You can't point out that gender ideology is creating damage. People who sometimes are creating damaged people who sometimes become violent. Because that's transphobia. That's hate speech. That's violence against a marginalized community. The transgender advocacy groups will tell you that violence is actually being committed against trans people, not by them. They'll cite statistics about transgender individuals being victims of violence, and some of that is true, but it doesn't change the pattern we're seeing with mass shootings. It doesn't explain why multiple transgender individuals have committed mass murder in recent years. It doesn't address the mental health crisis that gender ideology is creating. Dr. Lieberman pointed out that warning signs are often visible long before violence occurs. Parents notice unusual behavior. School counselors see warning flags. Mental health professionals have contact with these individuals. But too often, the depth of their mental problems is missed or not treated sufficiently. Why? Because if you're a therapist and a teenager comes to you saying they're transgender, What are you allowed to do under current policies in many states? You can't question it. You can't explore whether there are underlying issues causing the gender confusion. You can't try to help them accept their biological sex. You're required to affirm their identity. You're required to support their transition. If you try to do actual therapy addressing the underlying mental health issues, you can be accused of conversion therapy and lose your license. So these kids don't get the help that they need. They get affirmation and transition. Their underlying problems go untreated. And sometimes, years later, when the transition hasn't fixed anything and they're dealing with the reality of what's been done to them, they snap. Retired FBI agent Jason Pact tried to frame this neutrally, saying that law enforcement doesn't look at groups by identity, but at individual behavior and warning signs. He's trying to keep it from being political. But the reality is that identity is relevant when that identity is associated with a mental health crisis that's being ignored or mishandled because of political ideology. We can't fix the problem if we're not allowed to identify what that problem is. And the problem is this: gender dysphoria is a mental illness that requires real psychiatric treatment, not medical transition. When we treat it with transition instead of therapy, we're creating people with untreated mental health issues and permanent physical changes who sometimes become violent. That is the pattern. That's what the cases show. And that's what nobody in media or politics will honestly discuss, because it threatens the entire transgender ideology that Democrats are pushing. Now, let's connect this to how Democrats create very real problems that led to these tragedies, and why Renee Good and Alex Preddy, the two people shot by ICE that the media won't shut up about, are products of the same indoctrination system. Democrats have built an ideology that tells people they're victims, that society is oppressing them, that their problems aren't their fault. It's systematic injustice. It's discrimination. It's the evil people who won't accept them. This applies to transgender ideology. Kids who are confused about their identity, who are struggling with mental health issues, who are trying to figure out who they are. Democrats tell them they're transgender. They tell them society is transphobic. They tell them that anyone who won't affirm their chosen identity is a bigot who wants to erase their existence. This creates rage. This creates an us versus them mentality. This makes these kids see the world as divided between allies who affirm them and enemies who oppose them. And when the transition doesn't fix their problems, when they realize that they've been lied to, that rage has a target. The Christians who said it was wrong, the conservatives who opposed gender ideology, the society that they've been taught is oppressing them. Sometimes that rage stays internal and leads to suicide, which is why transgender individuals have tragically high suicide rates. Sometimes that rage turns outward and leads to violence against others. This is what the Democrat indoctrination does. It creates damaged, angry people who see themselves as victims of an oppressive society and sometimes lash out violently. The exact same process created Renee Good and Alex Preddy. These weren't heroes. These weren't activists fighting for justice. These were indoctrinated pawns who were radicalized by Democrat ideology to believe that ICE agents are evil, that immigration enforcement is tyranny, that they had a moral duty to physically resist federal law enforcement. Democrats told them that America is illegitimate, built on stolen land, fundamentally racist. They told them that immigration enforcement is racist. They told them that ICE agents are fascists who are rounding up innocent families. They told them that resistance is righteous. Renee Good believed it so completely that she positioned her vehicle to block federal agents, ignored lawful orders to move, and accelerated toward an agent when told to drive, baby, drive by her companion. She truly believed she was fighting tyranny. She died for that belief. Alex Preddy believed it so completely that he interfered with a federal operation, put himself in danger, and got shot. He truly believed ICE were the bad guys, and he was standing up to evil. They weren't fighting tyranny. They were interfering with law enforcement. They got themselves killed because Democrats filled their heads with lies about what ICE does and who ICE agents are. This is the same indoctrination process. Tell people they're victims or defenders of victims. Tell them that certain groups are oppressors. ICE, Christians, conservatives, anyone who opposes progressive ideology. Tell them that resistance is morally required. Then act shocked when they actually resist and face consequences. Democrats create transgender kids by telling confused children that their gender is a choice and transition is the answer. Then those kids transition, realize it didn't fix anything, develop severe mental health issues, and sometimes become violent. Democrats create activists like Renee Good and Alex Preddy by telling them that immigration enforcement is evil and resistance is righteous. Then those activists interfere with federal operations, ignore lawful orders, and get shot. Different manifestations of the same core problem. Democrat ideology that tells people they're victims of oppression, that radical action is justified, that society's rule doesn't apply because the society is fundamentally unjust. This is indoctrination. This is radicalization. This is how you create people who will act against their own interests, against basic self-preservation, against common sense. Because they've been programmed to believe they're fighting for something righteous. And when these indoctrinated people do exactly what they've been programmed to do, when transgender individuals commit violence, when activists interfere with law enforcement, Democrats and the media immediately shift to damage control. They hide the transgender shooter stories. They turn the dead activists into martyrs. They blame everyone except the ideology that created these situations. They'll never admit that telling kids they can change their sex creates mental health crisis that sometimes leads to violence. They'll never admit that telling activists that ICE is evil creates confrontations that sometimes end in death. because admitting that would mean acknowledging that their ideology is harmful, that their programming is creating damage. And it's creating damaged, dangerous people. That they bear responsibility for the violence and death that results. So instead, they hide it. They keep you focused on the 2 people shot by ICE while hiding the dozens shot by transgender killers. They turn Renee Good and Alex Preddy into heroes instead of acknowledging that they were radicalized pawns who got themselves killed. The indoctrination continues. More confused kids will be told that they're transgender and pushed towards transition without proper mental health care. More activists will be told that ICE is evil and resistance is righteous. And more people will die. More victims of transgender violence. More activists killed interfering with law enforcement. All of it preventable if we stopped the indoctrination. All of it inevitable as long as Democrats keep programming people with their toxic ideology. Let's get to the root of this. Gender dysphoria is a mental illness, not an identity, not a brave expression of authentic self. A mental illness that requires psychiatric treatment, not hormones and surgery. I know saying this gets you called transphobic, and I don't care. It's the truth. And people are dying because we're not allowed to tell the truth about this. Gender dysphoria is defined in psychiatric literature as distress caused by incongruence between one's experienced gender and assigned sex. That's the clinical definition. Someone feels like they should be the opposite sex and experience psychological distress because their body doesn't match that feeling. That's a mental health condition. The distress is real. The suffering is real. But the solution isn't to change the body to match the feeling. The solution is to treat the underlying psychological issues causing the distress and help the person accept their biological reality. We don't treat other body integrity identity disorders by amputating healthy limbs. We don't treat anorexia by affirming that the person is fat and helping them lose more weight. We treat the mental condition, not the symptom. But with gender dysphoria, we've abandoned every principle of psychiatric care because of political ideology. Instead of treating the mental illness, we're affirming the delusion and medically altering healthy bodies. This is insane. And it's creating a generation of severely damaged people. Here's what actually happens with medical transition. Puberty blockers pause natural development. Cross-sex hormones permanently alter the body, deepening voices, growing facial hair, developing breasts, redistributing fat. Surgery removes healthy organs and creates artificial approximations of opposite-sex anatomy. None of this changes biological sex. A male who takes estrogen and has surgery is still biologically a man. A female who takes testosterone and has surgery is still a biologic female. You can change appearance. You can alter secondary sex characteristics. You cannot change your sex. So what you've done is permanently damaged a healthy body without actually achieving the goal. The person is still the same sex they were born as. They just now have a body that's been medically altered to sort of look like the opposite sex. And the mental health issues, they're still there. The underlying psychological problems that caused the gender dysphoria in the first place, unaddressed. Study after study shows that medical transition doesn't actually improve long-term mental health outcomes. Suicide rates remain elevated even after transition. Depression and anxiety persist because you haven't treated the actual problem. You've just physically altered the person while the mental illness continues. And then reality sets in. These people who transitioned as teenagers or young adults based on what they were told would fix everything, and it didn't. They're still unhappy. They're still struggling. But now, they've got permanent changes to their body that can't be undone. This is when the detransitioner movement started emerging. People who transitioned and then realized it was a mistake and tried to go back. But you can't go back. Voices don't undeepen. Breasts that were removed don't grow back. Reproductive organs that were removed don't regenerate. These people are left with permanent physical changes, ongoing mental health issues, and a rage at the system that lied to them. The ideology told them that transition would fix everything. It didn't. The ideology told them that they could become the opposite sex. They can't. The ideology told them questioning was transphobic and that they should trust the affirming professionals. Those professionals failed them. So who do they blame? Society. The Christians who said it was wrong, the conservatives who oppose gender ideology. The system that they've been taught is oppressing them. And sometimes that blame turns to violence. Sometimes these damaged, betrayed, angry people lash out. Sometimes they target the communities they've been taught to hate. Sometimes they kill children in Christian schools or churches. This is what happens when you treat mental illness with ideology instead of medicine. When you prioritize political correctness over patient welfare. When you're more concerned about being accused of transphobia than about actually helping people. There are only two genders, male and female. That is biology. That is reality. You are born one or the other based on your chromosomes, your reproductive anatomy, your biological function. If you're uncomfortable with your biological sex, that's a mental health issue that needs to be addressed through therapy, not through medical transition, not through hormones and surgery, through actual psychiatric treatment that helps you accept reality and find peace with who you actually are. If you disagree with that, you should be committed, because denying basic biological reality is literally a psychotic break from reality. And we should be treating it as such instead of celebrating it. But we can't do that under current ideology. We have to affirm. We have to celebrate. We have to pretend that biology is optional and feelings determine reality. And kids are dying because of it. People with severe mental illness aren't getting treatment. They're getting hormones and surgery. And when that doesn't fix them, some of them become violent. The solution is simple. Stop the medical transition of minors. Ban puberty blockers for gender dysphoria. Ban cross-sex hormones for anyone under 18. Ban surgeries. Make it illegal to medicalize childhood gender confusion. For adults, require extensive psychiatric evaluation before any medical intervention. Real therapy that explores underlying issues, not just rubber stamping transition requests. Make people prove they understand the permanent consequences and that they've exhausted all other treatment options. Stop teaching gender ideology in schools. Stop telling kids that gender is a choice or a spectrum or whatever other nonsense. Teach biology. Teach reality. Let kids be confused without immediately telling them they're transgender. And most importantly, treat gender dysphoria as the mental illness that it is. Get these people real help. Get them therapy that addresses their actual psychological issues instead of affirming delusions. If we did these things, we'd have fewer transgender people overall because many kids who are currently being pushed towards transition would work through their confusion naturally. And the ones who do have genuine gender dysphoria would actually get treatment for their mental health issues instead of having their bodies destroyed. That would mean fewer people with untreated mental illness, fewer people with permanent physical changes and ongoing psychological problems, fewer damaged, angry people looking for someone to blame. And that would mean fewer mass shootings like the ones we've seen, fewer tragedies, fewer dead children, but that requires admitting that the transgender ideology is wrong, that medical transition doesn't work, that we've been harming people in the name of affirmation and acceptance. Democrats won't do that. The advocacy groups won't do that. The media won't do that because they're too invested in the ideology to admit it's creating killers. So the deaths will continue. More transgender individuals with untreated mental illness will commit acts of violence. More innocent people will die. More families will be destroyed. All preventable. All the direct result of treating mental illness with ideology instead of medicine. Now, let's talk about the spiritual dimension of this crisis, because at its core, this is a spiritual battle between truth and lies, between reality and delusion, between God's design and human rebellion. God created male and female. Genesis 1:27 is explicit. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. This isn't symbolic. This isn't metaphorical. This is the foundational truth about human creation. You are created male or female according to God's design. Your biological sex isn't an accident or a mistake. It's how God made you. And rejecting that, trying to change it, claiming you were born in the wrong body, that's rebellion against God's design. Gender dysphoria at its core is a spiritual crisis in a person rejecting how God made them. It's a person saying God got it wrong. I know better. I should be the opposite sex. That's pride. That's rebellion. That's the same sin that got Satan thrown out of heaven, thinking that he knew better than God. When Democrats push transgender ideology, when they tell kids they can choose their gender, when they celebrate transition as a brave and authentic, they're encouraging rebellion against God. They're telling people to reject God's design and remake themselves according to their own desires. This is satanic. I don't use that word lightly. This is literally opposition to God's created order. This is encouraging people to sin by rejecting their created nature. And what happens when you build your identity on rebellion against God? When you make your entire existence about rejecting His design, you end up spiritually empty, disconnected from your Creator, lost in confusion and despair. That's why transgender individuals have such high rates of depression and suicide. It's not just because society doesn't accept them. It's because they're living in opposition to how God made them. They're trying to find peace through rebellion, and that never works. You cannot find peace by rejecting God's design for you. You cannot find wholeness by mutilating your body that God gave you. You cannot find purpose by making your identity about being something that you're not. The only path to real peace is accepting how God made you and finding your identity in Him, not in your rejection of your biological sex. This is what these troubled people need to hear, not affirmation of their confusion, not celebration of their transition, but the truth that God made them male or female for a purpose, that their discomfort with their body is a spiritual and psychological issue that needs to be addressed through relationship with God and proper mental health care. But Democrats and the transgender ideology reject God entirely. They've replaced God with self. They've made the individual the ultimate authority on truth. If you feel like you're the opposite sex, then that feeling is truth, and biology is wrong. This is the ultimate expression of human pride and rebellion, elevating personal feelings above God's design, making the self into God. And what's the result? People who are spiritually empty, psychologically damaged, physically mutilated, and filled with rage at the world that won't fully affirm their delusion. Some of those people turn that rage inward and kill themselves. Some turn it outward and kill others. Either way is the fruit, it's the fruit of rebellion against God. The same spiritual emptiness drives activists like Renee Good and Alex Preddy. These are people who've rejected God and replaced Him with ideology. They've made political activism their religion. They've made resistance to oppression their purpose. But activism without God is empty. Politics without God is meaningless. You can't find purpose in resisting ICE or fighting for social justice or whatever cause Democrats have convinced you is righteous. The only real purpose comes from relationship with God. The only real peace comes from accepting His design and living according to his truth. When you reject God, you're left searching for meaning in ideology, in activism, in rebellion. And when that doesn't fill the void, when you realize that all your protesting and resisting hasn't given you purpose or peace, you become angry and desperate. That's when people do stupid things like positioning their vehicle to block federal agents. That's when they ignore lawful orders and get themselves killed. Because they're so desperate for their actions to mean something. So desperate to be fighting for a righteous cause that they'll literally die for ideology that they've substituted for God. This is what Democrats do. They take people who are spiritually empty and fill them with ideology. They give them causes to fight for. They tell them that activism is righteous and rebellion is brave. But it's all a substitute for what they actually need. Relationship with God, acceptance of His truth, and purpose found in Him, rather than opposition to His design. The solution to the transgender crisis isn't more affirmation. It's not more surgery. It's not more tolerance. It's getting people right with God. That means helping them understand that God created them male or female for a purpose. That their discomfort with their body is a sign of spiritual and psychological distress, not evidence that they're actually the opposite sex. That the solution is accepting God's design and finding identity in Him. It means providing real mental health care that addresses the underlying issues causing gender dysphoria, therapy that helps people work through trauma, resolve psychological conflicts, and accept biological reality instead of trying to escape it. It means bringing them to Christ, helping them understand that they are sinners in need of a Savior, that their rebellion against God's design is sin that needs to be repented of, and that Jesus offers forgiveness and new life to everyone who turns to Him. This is what actually heals people. Not hormones, not surgery, not affirmation, but truth, proper medical care, and relationship with God. And until we're willing to say that clearly, until we're willing to call transgender ideology what it is, rebellion against God's design, and offer the real solution, repentance and relationship with Christ, people will keep dying. Kids will keep being pushed into transition that destroys their bodies and leaves them psychologically damaged. Some of those damaged people will commit acts of violence. The media will keep hiding it. Democrats will keep pushing the ideology. The cycle continues until we return to God's truth. Until we rebuild society on the foundation of His design rather than human rebellion. Until we're willing to help people get right with God instead of affirming their sin. That's the real solution. Not politics, not policy, not better mental health care alone. Getting people right with God, helping them accept His design, bringing them to Christ, who can heal what ideology has broken. Let me bring this together so you understand what you're actually seeing when you consume media coverage of violence. 7 mass shootings by transgender individuals since 2018. At least 27 people dead. Multiple children murdered. 3 incidents just in 2026. A clear pattern of mental illness, transition, failure to find peace, and eventual violence. The media hides this. They minimize it. They refuse to discuss the pattern. They attack anyone who points it out. Meanwhile, 2 people shot by ICE in federal enforcement operations, both interfering with law enforcement, both warned, both making choices that got them shot. Wall-to-wall coverage, martyrdom. ICE, painted as villains. Every network, every newspaper, every platform pushing the narrative. This is deliberate manipulation. They keep you mad at ICE while hiding transgender violence because acknowledging the pattern would threaten the ideology Democrats are pushing. Renee Good and Alex Preddy weren't heroes. They were indoctrinated pawns radicalized by Democrat ideology to believe ICE is evil and resistance is righteous. They died for lies they were taught. Transgender shooters aren't isolated incidents. They're the predictable result of treating mental illness with ideology instead of proper care. When you tell confused kids they can change their sex, give them hormones and surgery, and then reality hits that it didn't fix anything, some of them snap. The solution is simple. Stop medicalizing gender confusion. Treat gender dysphoria as the mental illness that it is. Get people real help addressing underlying psychological issues. And most importantly, help them get right with God so they can accept His design and find real peace. But that requires admitting the ideology is wrong. The transition doesn't work. That we've been creating damaged, dangerous people. Democrats won't do that. The media won't do that. So the violence continues. More transgender shooters, more dead innocents, more families destroyed. All while the media keeps you focused on 2 people shot by ICE. You're being manipulated. They're keeping you mad at the wrong thing. And now you know why. This is why independent media matters. This is why platforms that'll tell you the truth, regardless of political pressure, are essential. Corporate media won't cover this honestly. They won't expose transgender violence pattern. They won't criticize the ideology creating killers. They serve the Democrat agenda that pushes this insanity. I'm telling you what they won't. I'm exposing what they hide. I am connecting the dots they don't want you to see. And I need your support to keep doing it. Visit TITDUSA.com or visit the Stand Against the Silence campaign and support the mission. Silence is no longer neutral when the media hides transgender violence while obsessing over ICE shootings. When they protect ideology that creates killers, when they manipulate what you're allowed to know, silence becomes cooperation with their lies. I refuse to be silent. I'm speaking the truth about transgender ideology, about media manipulation, about Democrat indoctrination, about what's really causing the violence in America. Donating to the Stand Against the Silence campaign sustains independent media that won't bow to pressure from transgender advocacy groups or Democrat politicians or Republican politicians. It keeps honest coverage alive. It protects speech that powerful interests want silenced. Your support says truth still matters. Mental illness should be treated, not celebrated. We won't be manipulated by media narratives. You can also support Truth in the Darkness Network on YouTube, Spotify, Patreon, and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe, share the content, leave reviews. Help us reach more people who are tired of being lied to. Every subscription, every donation, every share helps us compete with corporate propaganda. Helps us tell the truth when everyone else is hiding it. It helps us serve your right to know what's really happening instead of what the media wants you to believe. Thank you for standing against the silence. Thank you for supporting independent media that refuses to hide uncomfortable truths. The media keeps you mad at ICE while hiding transgender violence. Now you know the truth. Now you can make informed decisions instead of being manipulated. Visit TITDUSA.com. Support Stand Against the Silence. Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Patreon, and Apple Podcasts. Stand with us. Support the truth. Refuse manipulation. I will see you next time. God bless.